The Adventures of Bayou Billy is proof that sometimes a game company should be content with mediocrity. Released in North America by Konami in June of 1989, Bayou Billy is a port of the Japanese game Mad City. We'll be looking at the differences between the two versions, and why Mad City is a kind of okay game, and The Adventures of Bayou Billy is one of the worst things that has ever been put on a cartridge. But it's not out of place among 1980s action-adventure games. You play as Billy West, a Louisiana-raised Vietnam veteran who looks the way Japanese people think Paul Hogan looks. When Godfather Gordon kidnaps Billy's girlfriend Annabelle, you chase down Godfather Gordon and kill half the population of Louisiana to get him. The game features beat-em-up levels, 2 shooting segments, and 2 consecutive segments in which you drive a car, all spread across 9 stages. As a little bit of a surprise, the game includes a small number of cutscenes and even some small attempts at voice acting.
The Adventures of Bayou Billy.
None of these segments are done particularly well, but at least in Mad City they're mostly inoffensive. I'll start with the Japanese Mad City version of the game, then demonstrate what the American Adventures of Bayou Billy does to ruin it. The beat-em-up levels suffer from a very limited, unimaginative design. Billy's range of attack is very limited, and most enemies can meet or exceed his reach. Even with perfect positioning, about the best an unarmed player can hope for against most enemies is a chance to trade hits until the bad guy falls down. While you can find a knife, ugly stick, whip, or gun, the game is really good about only giving you guns right before you're about to fight a bulletproof enemy. That sort of cheap design does take a little bit of fun out of the game, but with a little bit of practice, it's believable that, with time and patience, you could probably slog through these beat-em-up segments. This is not a compliment. Next up is the shooting portion of the game, which has some of the most engaging and frustrating gameplay that this game has to offer. The first stage puts you in the swamp, and the second in the big city, and it's one of the few parts of the game where the art design really shines. The 2 shooting stages have really different looks, and it's nice to see that so much work was put into the environment that way. The enemies come at a pretty reasonable pace, and in most parts of each shooting stage, you're always under threat of taking damage, but when you've taken a hit, you usually feel like it was a failure on your part and not the controls that just got you shot. The one problem with the shooting stages, and it's a big one, is the boss fight at the end of either stage. In each stage, you're taking on 2 enemies at a time, one of whom has a machine gun and is guaranteed to hit you over and over again. Instead of feeling like a test of skill, these fights really come down to how lucky you get and how fast you can pull the trigger in a short amount of time, and it's a shame that they let down what would otherwise be one of the best experiences in the game. You've also got the driving stages, which are, weirdly enough, pretty fun. Who doesn't enjoy firing a roof-mounted shotgun at passing cars while throwing hand grenades at helicopters? People who hate America, that's who. These levels are pretty simple and straightforward, and also feature some of the least imaginative level design ever seen in video games. See, in the first driving stage, Stage 4, the grass is green. But when you get to Stage 5, the grass becomes blue-green. It's innovation like this which caused the game to be as fondly remembered as it is today. The really weird thing is that despite how much I'm about to trash-talk this game, the American version, The Adventures of Bayou Billy, does include some improvements over the original Mad City. The voice samples are new to the American version, the driving stages now include a helpful guide to establish how far along in the level you've gone, and playing the controller-based version of the shooter stages rather than the zapper versions, there's a built-in auto-fire feature which makes the bosses I complained about earlier a lot more bearable. And still, despite those changes, they managed to make several other, completely unnecessary alterations which only serve to ruin the game. So if half the stages in Mad City are pretty fun, how is it that The Adventures of Bayou Billy is a game more deserving of hate than maybe any other I've ever played? Glad you asked, viewer! For reasons beyond my understanding, Konami decided that Mad City was a little too easy, so when it came time to export the game to the United States, they made a few tweaks to the difficulty. For starters, they reduced the amount of damage that Billy does in the side-scrolling stages. At the same time, they also increased the amount of health enemies had. I don't know if these changes were made by two different programmers who hadn't bothered speaking to each other, but the end result is that many enemies in the game now take 3 times as many hits before they're finally killed. This is the definition of false challenge. Instead of requiring some greater skill to make it through the beat-em-up stages, this change makes it so that what were already the weakest stages in the game are now even longer and more frustrating. The driving levels feature similar quote-unquote improvement, in that the roads now twist and turn a lot more than they ever did in the Japanese version, and instead of having a life bar, your car explodes the first time it touches anything. Where's the fun in that? If you played this game as a kid and gave up without ever making it past the first level, I'll bet I can guess what made you hit the cartridge with a hammer until your parents enrolled you in youth counseling. Hypothetically. Alligators! This is another example of how the localization team for The Adventures of Bayou Billy lacked any understanding of the game they were altering. In Mad City, there's an awful lot of alligators. They take a ton of hits to take down, they spend most of their time underwater, and you can only hit them with your no-range, weakest attack in the game punch, or a stick that you'll lose in the swamp as soon as an alligator hits you. Which will happen, because alligator snouts are an awful lot longer than Billy's arm. What Mad City does right, though, is that these alligators are less enemies and more environmental hazards. You can go the whole game without getting into a fight with an alligator simply by running through those parts of the game as quickly as possible. When it came time to release The Adventures of Bayou Billy in the United States, the Konami localization team somehow missed the part where alligators are terrible and no fun at all, and altered several screens to include unskippable alligator fights. It's one of the best examples I can offer of how this game's localization process managed to repeatedly misunderstand game design decisions made by another team within the same company. This has nothing to do with the actual development of the game, but I would like to take this opportunity to complain about Bayou Billy's completely unwarranted media blitz. This is a game that got a TV ad, a comic book, and an entire episode of Captain N the Game Master dedicated to it. How is it that Bayou Billy gets a 5-issue Archie comic series in 1989, but the same company doesn't get around to doing a Mega Man comic until 2011? How did Amanda Conner, one of the best comic book artists working in the industry today, end up doing work on the Bayou Billy comic? Why does the cover to the 3rd issue of the Bayou Billy comic have him losing a knife fight to a black-furred weasel man? Why is there an entire Captain N episode about Bayou Billy? Why does the cartoon's footage of Captain N make the game look completely different and absolutely terrible? Why does this version of the game look like one I'd rather be playing? Why would children play a video game that Captain N admits he's never beaten? Why does the episode's plot revolve around a robot cat? Why is Mega Man so terrible in this? Why would you put Bayou Billy in the same cartoon as Simon Belmont when all that's going to do is remind kids that they could be playing a different, better Konami game instead? Why does even an NES shill like Captain N refer to Bayou Land as the worst place in the universe? Why is the Frogman an actual, literal, hell comes to Frogtown frog-man rather than a guy in a scuba suit? Why does the Captain N version of Bayou Billy look like a jelly bean with a mullet? Why does my head hurt, and why does nothing feel like it makes sense anymore? Since Captain N admits to having never beaten The Adventures of Bayou Billy, I'm going to make a similar confession. I've beaten Mad City, but I've only beaten The Adventures of Bayou Billy with Game Genie codes. I know that violates all sorts of nerd law, but I needed footage for this week's episode and was willing to compromise my own principles so that you guys could see the end credits. I know that there are people who have beaten this game through legitimate means, and it doesn't actually upset me that I'm not one of them. I'm not a terrible game player. I'm just not one who sees any value in investing the time and getting good at The Adventures of Bayou Billy. If you are that kind of person, get help. Please. And if you're working as a member of a localization team, please use The Adventures of Bayou Billy as a guide on how not to properly adjust difficulty when adapting the game for a new audience. This game makes me sad and angry. Don't play it. By the way, the Bayou Billy episode of Captain N the Game Master makes it canon that Simon Belmont likes feet. Welcome to Frogtown.